We're gonna get started.
Yeah, we can go ahead and do the committee updates anyway. Maybe they'll get down here by the end.
All right, well, I know we have a couple members that will be joining us here pretty soon, but we'll go ahead and get started because we have more than enough to keep us busy today on our agenda. We're gonna go ahead and get started with committee updates before we get into kind of the meat of the meeting. Appraisal committee met on April 30th. Hello. And we met for a couple hours, kind of ironing out some of the, I guess, trickier parts of the committee recommendation. A couple of the things that we have been talking about the last couple of meetings have been the goal associated with the KEEP appraisal system. So each educator selects a goal that's related to some area of the rubric. And we were just looking at some of the more technical aspects of how that goal will be submitted on Frontline and when it'll be due, those kinds of things. But I think everybody on the committee agreed that having the educators select an area that they want to focus on during their cycle makes a lot of sense as we think just about adult learning theory. So we talked about that quite a bit. And then we talked also about the building level and district level support plans, and really worked on the templates associated with those. And we'll take a look at those here in just a bit. And Justin Howe is chairing that committee. Anything else from the appraisal committee you want to highlight? And all the details, but
And just thanks for all the people on it. I'll tell you the process. A lot of detail.
Yeah. And all the appraisal committee members, at least this year, are on the professional council website if anybody's interested in who served on that committee. For the calendar committee, we had our last meeting, I think it was last week.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I believe it was. And I failed to print a copy of the document, but I did put it in our professional council folder under committee's calendar. The last document that we really need to work on this year was the grade and reporting calendar for next year. And we spent more time than we normally would in calendar committee looking at that, just because that document said things like print report cards. So we spent a little extra time like, okay, let's make the document actually align with like our practices now. So really appreciated. I know Judy Martin's on that committee. She helped us kind of clarify some things on the special education monitoring progress reforms. And that document is on, is in that folder, again, the calendar committee folder under that professional council folder. The other thing that we talked about a little bit is looking at, of course, the professional learning calendar. We already, that's already posted on the Ozone. We talked a little bit about, of course, we always have those mandatory trainings at the beginning of the year. So we talked about how for next year, one of the normally principal directed half days got flipped out for an additional half day of educator prep. So we talked about that would be one of the options of places that those mandatory trainings could be accomplished. And we, I think at the board meeting, we'll probably hear a little bit more about updated bullying policy. So that may impact the trainings a little bit. So those, I think, were the two main things we talked about in calendar. Anything else from appraisal or calendar? Okay. For the conference committee, I know you all did not get a chance to meet, but I went ahead and brought, because we are on a quick timeline, I brought a hard copy of the Mill Creek and the 2-year academies conference scheduling variants. As you all know, Mill Creek has now done this pilot 3 times. Yeah. And the 2-year academies, OATC has done it twice. And we asked them to get feedback from the educators. We asked them to get feedback from the families. All that feedback came back very positive. So our last step was to ask the ARs and the administrators in those buildings or programs to collaborate on some language that we could put into our agreement that kind of fits the needs of their programs better than the traditional conference schedule. And so this language is what they brought forward.
This language reflects what they've done in the pilot.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in the pilot, each time we looked at the language when they were doing the pilot, they would like put an exact date.
Okay.
So I indicated, instead of that, it's like the 5th week of Q2 and the 5th week of Q4.
Yeah.
They swapped out that language.
Yeah.
It'll require some math each year, but it makes it more general so it can fit.
Yeah. And of course, the number of hours that the educators work is equal to the number of hours that educators work in all other buildings and programs.
So this is the language we're proposing to put in the,
Yeah, so the agreement indicates once you've done a pilot program as a variance, then assuming that program has success, then it would become part of the agreement.
so it would still say we are proposing a variance, like that language would go into the agreement.
We would probably modify.
Okay,
That-
that's what I'm
yeah.
just confused about.
Yeah.
is-
Yeah, I think we, in terms of like where exactly would go in the agreement, like exactly what page it would go.
Probably.
Yeah,
Special educators, so.
yeah. Because it would no longer be a variance.
Right.
It would just be part of the agreement.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be 2 pages now. Yeah, the font's already pretty small.
Yeah, that might not be a 1-pager.
Yeah.
We'll have to maybe get a little creative.
Uh-huh.
Any questions or input on that?
That's second bullet, educators will be present for 5 hours on, is that supposed to be or from, or? No, that's probably just from. Strike
Yep.
on, yeah. Okay.
And you'll notice in the 2-year academies language in the second bullet, it gives it a little flexibility based on the CTSO competition schedules. Of course, that's something very unique to their needs. Yeah,
You may have such a significant portion of students and educators out for those.
Mhm.
And then, yeah.
In the Mill Creek, it has like 1 dash and then hour spelled out, but then in the 2-year, it's just 1 HR.
yeah, we would want to
So-
clean that up for consistency.
Mm.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a now thing, but it's just.
Okay, if it's circled on this now, that's more likely it'll get fixed later.
And we also, like, there's 2 different locations we're working on this, right? So like,
Yeah,
those sorts of things will happen when you have 2 different groups.
absolutely. And they were definitely collaborating,
Yeah.
but also working with their individual
Yeah.
situations. So. Did you figure out the 12 hours?
Yeah.
Yeah, it took me a couple of times.
Good. Oh, got it now.
you see any other cleanup, feel free to let me know. I've got those. As tempting as it is to let Justin sit here for all of our agenda items until we get to the bottom, we thought we would move the appraisal proposal up. Justin has hard copies of some of the documents in the big handbook I'm getting ready to put in the appraisal folder. There is some cleanup on the handbook still, but these documents have been cleaned up. So I'll hand it over to you, Justin.
Oh, thank you. Yes, similar to what the payment we're doing. Yeah, that same on the appraisal document. So I have several I can screen up, but this document that's going around, we called KEEP evaluation at a glance. So KEEP is Kansas Educator Evaluation Protocol. We've had this is something that we looked at several different models in the committee over the last several years and landed on the KEEP model, as that's something that statewide is pretty adopted. It is also something done by a lot of our neighbors in Johnson County as well. And so that also promotes fluency as educators go from district to district, and consistency in the way they're evaluated in the protocol and the standard evaluation practices. And then we went back and re-audited also all of our current practices against KSD's standards as when it comes to evaluation and different dates, and re-looked at all of those things. So what we put together is a one-page piece for our 5 pilot schools. We had 1 high school, Olathe West, 2 middle schools, California and Chisholm. And then we had 2 elementary schools, and Countryside and Forest View. And had a lot of great feedback through that process also. So this year we were able to get feedback through the process about the rollout and training and making sure the new parts were understood, and if not, which parts. We also talked surveys to new educators in the process, get their feedback. And we also sent a survey to career educators and got their feedback to look at different parts. And our committee evaluated those pieces. So the one page you see before you is probably the largest items in that piece. So the beautiful part about it right now is that it's still housed in our online tracking system, and we refer to it as online tracking system because systems change. And so we want to make sure we have longevity, but Frontline is that online tracking system that we currently use. We work with Frontline. We have 18 different rubrics. So last summer we had committees broken up into educators from those, and really went through, looked at the rubric language, suggested edits. So 2 years ago, the committee's work was really around the rubrics, making sure they fit the content that they were matched to. And then last summer, we had Frontline load those in to that, and we discovered some errors in that through the pilot process, which is very helpful as well, and worked with them. But the nice part about that is it's very similar when you log in, as far as the 4 performance levels are labeled the same as they are currently. They're labeled left to right the way they are currently. We did find an error where they were backwards and get those fixed as well. But and then the components are broken down very similar to our current. So the language is where you start to see changes. Instructional practices protocol, or the IPP is what they refer to it as, is your rubric. So if you think about it in our current language, it's the first 5 standards that have instructional practices, management, continue your own education, all those bullets and rubrics. And then you have these student performance measures, which is what we call standard 6. And so we only have 5 constructs in KEEP, not 6. So standard 6 becomes construct 5 for all intents and purposes. And then there are 4 major constructs for the rubric itself. And so that piece is labeled there as well. Those 4 constructs are learner and learning, content knowledge, instructional practice, and professional responsibility. And a lot of this was, again, modeled from the state level and then broken into committee to make it more applicable to Olathe. Same thing when it comes to student performance measures. It's formally standard 6, but really construct 5 is 3 pieces. It's a state requirement, and it really mirrors what we currently do. That part is probably the least changed, in my opinion, when it comes to what we currently do and how we roll it over. And then a combination of both the independent practice or the instructional practices protocol and student performance data come together just similar to what we do now. When you take the first 5 standards and you add in standard 6 and you get a combined rating, it's very similar to what this system does. And then additional new components. This is where we start to look at some things that were added in. A self-assessment by educators done in Frontline will be completed no later than September 15th. So that is not scored or held against the educator, but it is a requirement from the state that they complete a self-assessment. And what we found was really nice in this pilot was that was a great way to acclimate to the rubric and understand it. And that's going to really also, I think, help our new educators that come into Olathe to understand that as well. But when we look at the career educator side, it was really helpful for them to not only know the new rubric, but also when we've talked about the goal piece, which we're going to talk about next. And the goals were also something that's new. And we said we have a 1 goal minimum, and you could do more, and it must be tied into the instructional practices protocol. And the reason the committee decided on that was we already are doing our Construct 5 or Standard 6, which is student data driven. So where's the focus on the rubric itself? And that's where the goal comes in. So educators sit down and they score themselves on the self-assessment. Again, it's not used in the formal summative, but it is a conversation piece between evaluator and educator to say, okay, this is what you're working on. This is where I can help you. And it gives them a focus and a drive on the rubric piece, not just the standard 6 or the student data piece that I know it does get a lot of attention, rightfully so, but the other part is equally as important. So the goal piece was a new component also from the state expectation as well. So that piece, we looked at our goal form. We streamlined that goal form through the appraisal committee process as well to 3 things. What's the goal? These are the basic tenets. What is the goal? How can we support her? What do you need to do to achieve that goal? And then how will you know when you've achieved that goal? So you look at how can we support you? And then what assessments or objective data can you know to do that? Again, the goal is actually not part of the summative evaluation. It's not part of the scoring process, if you will, but it is essential into the summative evaluation and collaborative piece, I think, between administrator and educator to get the best practices for it. On the back is of that, it's a 2-page, really the overview and a table of important dates. And this was something the pilots helped us out immensely with, because there were some date changes especially when you look at the educators in the 1st and 2nd years, or what we refer to as new educator 1 or new educator 2. Looking at state statutes, we had some things that we were probably out of compliance, and we really streamlined that. Some of the language is vague and some of it's not from the state. Some of it is no later than February 15th and some is no later than 60 days of the semester. So we had some wiggle room in some areas, some we didn't. New educators 1 and 2, we did 60 days, and we had set it initially as October and February 15th and October 15th. And the feedback from the pilots was that's too soon. And so we stretched it basically as far as we could in the 60-day window by allowing also some grace. I think we gave ourselves a week of grace in case there was an absence or an issue. And we pushed that back through the committee's work to November 1 and March 1 for the first educators in their first 2 years. And then that's where educators 3 and 4 and career educators or 5th year and beyond, the state's pretty black and white on no later than February 15th. So that's where you'll see some changes in dates and why. The self-assessments, the goals are listed as well. And we also added when should student performance data be due. We know that the summative evaluation combines the student data and the instructional practices. It's exactly what we do now. But we had some good conversations around what are some good dates to tell educators to make sure that they get their data in so that we can hit those dates. And so we put in for the new educators 1 and 2, October 1st and February 1st, which is a month before their summatives would be due each semester, which is similar to educators 3 and 4 in career, which is January 15th, a month before the due date of the summative, to allow the data to be observed, talked through, any questions, any additional things needed, and still be in compliance with the dates we have to hit. So those are, and Angie, if I missed anything, hop in, but those I think are the big tenets of that process. And of course, in that, we then also talked about a change to our building support plan process and our district assistance process. Before I get to that though, Angie, did I miss anything about just the key process?
No, I just think because the number one thing on the bargaining survey about appraisal was why can't we get rid of standard 6? This is student performance. So I'll ask it again.
Yeah.
Why can't we get rid of the student performance data component of appraisal?
Yeah.
probably, all of us that have been around a minute, remember when that came on, so, it's not on the way.
I think one opportunity that this pilot has provided us is in our in our current appraisal system, the district-wide appraisal system. Standard 6 was truly like a tack on. We had a system, we tacked it on. And so this did allow us to have some conversations about, like, for example, the self-assessment. That was like, oh, when you go to your summative assessment, you'll bring your rubric and you'll self-assess. And that always kind of felt tacked on too. So now the idea is we move that self-assessment at the beginning as right. So I think there are some things, just process-wise that are maybe in a more logical order. But there are components that are required. So.
I think data things too, Justin has shared this, but this is 2 years in the making, so I think we really comb through rubrics, and so it gave us another great opportunity to tag on with Angie to also update all of our rubrics and really make sure that, like, when we're talking about, some of our more unique positions, we're talking about occupational therapists, physical therapists, and those other kinds of roles, that they were finding rubrics that really tie to their work and being able to inform and give them feedback targeted at the work that they do every day. So that was another piece of the heavy lift that took us a little longer than we thought it was going to. So, and then we did incorporate that into the pilots this year and making sure that we kind of tested those specialized rubrics out. And I know Justin did even more follow-up work this past year in making edits to those as we found things that, like, oh, this seems to be missing, or this is a little off. So
there are, to that point, some edits that still need to be made because if we change it in Frontline, this is from Frontline, then it changes it can change the data in. So if someone was scored off of that language and we change it, it could change that. So we opted to make them aware that we're aware of the error. We acknowledge that, we will fix that, but we want to keep it as is so that it is the most true to the pilot, and then we can change it this summer off season in a row. So should we talk about the support plan process? So currently we have a building support plan process in our current appraisal and evaluation system and a district assistance panel. What our committee has looked at is keeping those tenets and using this time to sand down or streamline any pieces. And so the educator support plan or building support plan process still exists, still very much in process with our panel. I think the biggest changes would be the template that we've selected or drafted up is, I would say, a little bit more collaborative and also a little more thorough than our current MyFile library template. It's been around for quite a while, and it does its job, but this one I believe has a few more components that require the appraisers we're going to talk about to do a few more steps than what we currently require them to do. And also it really enforces the collaboration, not just at the beginning of the plan, but throughout the plan and also at the end of the plan to talk about those steps. So that's one thing that we can look at. And the second thing is we had a prescribed timeline. It's a 60-day minimum currently. We've talked about this in good detail at our committee, and we are proposing that we change that to a reasonable amount of time as collaborated upon between educator and appraiser. And the reason for that is 60-day minimum when you get into the plan has some drawbacks. Quite frankly, doesn't take 60 days in some cases to meet the requirements or see success. Some we do as informal, and we try to see those within 1 or 2 weeks. And then when we start to put in formal support plans, we talked about, it can be a little defeating when you see good progress and sustained progress after 3 to 4 weeks, but it necessarily doesn't take 60 days. And so we want to honor that process too, but it also, we really keyed in on the collaborative piece. And that's how reasonable time is a collaborative process. So it's got to be seen both ways, and it's got to talk about consistency and success. And so you'll see that there's no defined time in the support plan language, rather more emphasis on collaboration and support. And if they both feel that that's ready, then we can back off of those supports. Likewise, we can also increase those supports. If there becomes a reasonable amount of time where, 60 days is an old standard, but if there's just not a consistent growth or a consistent success, then we can go to district, what we call now a district assistance panel, but in this we call district support plan process. And our current model, it has a lot of tenets of that. Our current model is 10 members, 5 district administration, building administration, and then 5 educators from our union. And so there's pros and cons to that model, and we talked about that. One of the big changes that you'll see is the instructional assistant, all those pieces are almost the same. The biggest change is the panel itself will go from 10 to proposed 4. What I really like about this is it's differentiated to the educator. So what that 4 looks like is it's going to have the educator that would be recommended through the same recommendation processes, and then 2 educators as identified by ONEA president, in this case Angie. And what we'd like to do is see job alike. We'd like to see somebody that has that content knowledge or that level of knowledge to really be tailored to support and understand what that educator is going through. Likewise, on the other level, it would be it'd be a district administrator, could be the HR director of that level, could be the GA at that level, et cetera, could be someone from the IRC, but also a building administrator in another building at that level who also understands what that entails and takes on a day-to-day basis, and could have someone in their building doing the same things to be able to speak to and offer supports and resources. And we felt that that was a much more differentiated process to who's in the panel to make sure that they get the most support and most accurate support. We also looked at reasonable amount of time. And so that's a collaborative process as well between the panel and the IA to talk about the supports that are needed, the response to intervention, if you will, and then next steps. Ultimately, same process ending with either recommending they go back to the regular evaluation cycle because sustained success has been observed, or a recommendation for non-renewal after a reasonable amount of time as collaborated upon by that committee. So we were speaking, there's 4 folks, collaborative unison would be 3 out of 4 would have to agree to that, ideally 4 out of 4. So the template for the building support plan.
Put it in the professional council committee's appraisal folder so you can take a look at it. It's got some colors on it.
Color coded, yeah.
Yes.
That plan would be submitted, and it is similar to what we do now. Plan submitted along with all the interventions and responses to interventions before someone can be accepted into the panel. The panel reviews all of that application material to see if the building level had adequate supports, if there's anything else they could have done prior to this stage at lowest level. And then if that felt all those requirements were met, accepting in and then going out. The first step is always notifying the person they've been accepted and the overall steps in those processes. Next step is developing a strategic plan. And then third step is implementation and timelines.
And to clarify on the educator support plan, the building plan, excuse me, and the district support plan, both of those options are available to new educator year 4 and after.
Correct. And we wanted to delineate that, as we've talked about in our committee. That's a common misconception that new educator can be lumped in, but really new educator 4 to career educators 1, 2, or 3 would be included in this process. We did pull out specific language. The handbook is lengthy, but it has a lot of great parts, and we certainly don't want to oversee that. But we pulled out specific language to the support plans, and I think Angie put those as well in there just to look at specific language to that. And really, I like the first paragraph. We really focused on a 2-tier approach, thinking what we do in the classroom too when we look at interventions and tier 1 and tier 2, and building support plan is truly tier 1, and then district level support is a tier 2.
And kind of building on what you were just saying, Justin, in the handbook, which is 40-some pages, that still has some editing.
Yeah.
The part that Justin just spoke to, the support plans, that part has been pulled out and it's in its own document, and that has been updated recently. So if you're wanting to look at that piece, you want to look at that separate document.
With the comments.
The only other thing that we had that was an adjustment to the ELC that we used in the pilot as well was, when we talk about the support payment plans, you'll see something called an out of cycle evaluation. We had a lot of conversation about, those educators that maybe make a big transition, to a different content or to a whole different level and, supporting that transition and not wanting the appraisal to be seen as something that was purely just a punitive, if you will, but like a means for support. So you can see that out of cycle evaluation was a piece that we included as well, that educator could be, even if that wasn't their quote unquote cycled appraisal year, have a conversation about utilizing the appraisal in order to get feedback when they make that kind of transition.
When you say different level, do you mean like elementary to middle?
Yeah.
Or would that be grade level?
Yeah, it could be either.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we have a lot of grade level movement, right?
Right.
So like,
Right, and it wouldn't be just a carte blanche, this happens every time. It would be something that could be used as another option for support.
The out of cycle piece took a few of our current pieces and put it into one. So we have anyone extended and we have a transition year. I'm blanking on the third one, but it basically combines those into one, which I also like because it gives autonomy a little bit. But it mirrors the timeline of an NE1, which is essentially what we do now in the timeline. But it's good for that feedback. So a great example Julie brought up is could be a grade level change. A lot of times it's a content level change or a level change altogether. Elementary to middles, it happens very often, and that just allows the NE1 timeline very nice because it gives them more observations and feedback from their appraiser and really that transition. So out of cycle encompasses all three of the previous ones and the same idea. And you don't have to be labeled one thing or the other. It's just out of cycle, which would be very
On the document with the support plans, the document that you sent me today that had the updates, did you update the date at the end of or does it still say March? So I'm looking at the one that Megan has up on her computer and it's still,
this one.
no, I'm talking about the keep support plan language.
Oh, the pull out language.
Yeah. I just want to make sure I have the most updated
Yeah, and then
one.
which one? Sorry.
No, so the one that I uploaded to the appraisal folder, at the end of the document, it has the date of 3/23, but I don't know if that's actually the most updated one.
No, it'll be today actually.
Can you send that
I
to
will
me
do
again?
that.
Okay, yeah, that's why. That
Yeah.
document is all
Real time.
over. Yeah, yeah.
Is Dab at updating the actual policy
Okay,
in our language on page 22. And so I will pass around, I'll start first with the red line version, and then I have a completely clean one, I think. So we can kind of take a look at that because I know that would be language we would need to have updated. So this is policy GB. language that previously, of course, also included our language about the pilot we did this year. And so I just updated this. There were just a couple of cleanups on that first paragraph with the appropriate statute numbers. So I wanted to get that updated. And then just kind of gave the, outline, if you will, of the appraisal process we're moving to, which is the OLAFIC, which is the Kansas Educators Evaluation Protocol. And then kept the language that educators and administrators jointly develop the process. And then in the next paragraph, this language is all taken directly from the KEEP, the actual appraisal handbook as well. And so it just states that it's a rigorous, transparent, and equitable system that's used for continual improvement, meaningfully differentiates performance, is based on evidence and artifacts, evaluates educators on a regular basis, KSB statutes, provides useful feedback, and is used to inform equity. And then down below, I took out that piece there that this kind of replaced, but then kept the appraisal continuum begins with the new educator and through the individual's career. And then the next section just talks about that the appraisal process is based on those expectations with our core expectations and goals. And then I, on this section, did not include the constructs because I felt like when we talk about those other specialized kind of rubrics, I think we've got about 14 of them, if I'm remembering correctly. 16, okay. These were not always going to like perfectly align. So I just kept it a little more general in terms of the pieces that are in place across all rubrics. And that is that final summative rating is comprised of the instructional practice protocol summary rating and the student performance rating. And then the rest of this really was specific to our old appraisal system and kind of language and definitions that were a part of that. So I think I passed around the other clean version as well.
If I recall, in this year's negotiated agreement, of course, the unredlined version is in the policy part, and then portions of the handbook are in the appendix. So I believe one of the portions in the handbook that is currently in there for the pilot does have those like base constructs, not the entire rubrics. But what I heard you say was that those base constructs don't necessarily apply consistently through all of the rubrics.
I don't think the verbiage is
Right.
I know we tried to see real
The concept.
consistency on the formatting and like number of constructs. You know, we didn't want to have one employee group or educator groups rubric to be, 4 pages and another 2 or that kind of thing. So we tried to really keep consistency there. But that verbiage is going to be a little different depending on the educator's role. Yeah. So hopefully that doesn't get too confusing. So.
Those are very minor changes, Michelle. I noticed.
Is this
the
the statute?
It is a little bit. I may not have told you, I apologize. So I'm reading the clean, I call it the clean version, all the accepted red lines. It says the Evaluation Personnel Act, it's the 3rd line down. You can probably capitalize P there. But then the other number changed. It's 72 dash. I just had it 2407 through 72-2412. I guess it's up there in the legal description.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, so very anal retentive.
That's
There
okay.
you go.
72 2407.
It's actually the piece that was redlined out, it looks like. We might have had it right.
No,
Yeah.
no. Okay, got it.
Oh, I think you did have it right, but I think it was start red lines. You're good.
Thank you.
I do now have the support process document, the correct one on there. But I can't delete the old one because one of you lovely humans has it open. So once I can delete the old one, I will delete it so that you don't have to.
As part of your like data collection and things, is there just a simple-ish number of like just educators or appraisers or both that like this compared to the old one? Was that data or?
Yeah, we could go back on all of our surveys. It was indicated favorable, and we got every meeting, we got feedback from all the pilots that are on the committee. And so I think the number one thing we heard that was favorable was it just seems like what we've been doing. I mean, it's in Frontline, it looks the same in those processes. I know the language that we heard, probably the largest, I need understanding on this more is the goal setting. And we did in the fall have a lot of conversations about the goal setting piece, and we feel like we're in a good space as we roll out. So when we looked at training pieces, you know, that starts in the summer with our administrator retreat and training the appraisers. And then we developed several training pieces, including a voiceover PowerPoint with the information to have consistency across all the buildings. And the pilot buildings got to hear that exciting and thrilling voiceover PowerPoint. And we got traction on that was very helpful. But again, I think that goal setting piece is the thing that we keep getting feedback on of, was it scored? Does this count again? You know, can it be this? Can it be that? And that's really where we developed what we proposed tonight through that process. But our surveys, I'm trying to think, Angie, I don't think anything stood out as negative as far as the process or the piece.
Yeah, and I think at the beginning, there was just, like you said, a lot of questions about the goals. You know, that idea of like, do I need to set a really low goal so I look good versus like, actually it's supposed to be a goal of something you'd like to actually focus on and, you know, try to grow in over the course of that cycle. To Justin's point about like the goal itself is not like graded or scored.
Yeah.
Of course, having a goal has always been part of the evaluation process because it is also a state mandate, but it was kind of on the back end with the data. Which at the time made sense because it was a tack on. But I think having at the beginning will seem more purposeful.
Yeah. I think even go deeper to that question. One of the things we had heard negative about our current one is that it felt one way, did not feel collaborative, did not feel like a process. And so that was at the forefront of, I think, our committees for the last several years was how does this truly become a collaborative feel, collaborative process? And that's where we turned into the goal process as that avenue. So we talked about SMART goals, and we opted to not do the SMART goal template because again, that felt like a hoop to jump through, and this is the format. So we made it as streamlined as possible with the idea that you really can talk together about this, about the practice of getting better at your craft. And that's really our sole intent. And we did have a couple positive comments even from the pilot on the survey feedback. So
I think one mind shift that the KEEP process could help us in is sometimes in some of our current systems, we're asked to identify a goal. It's like, you're not doing well, you need a goal.
Yeah.
Versus in this, everybody has a goal. It's not like, oh, you need help, so get a goal. Like everybody will have a goal. So I think that could cause some confusion moving forward. Because people could think it's like, oh, are you putting me on a building plan? No. It's part of everybody's KEEP process.
The other positive we heard from it was the current system has been fantastic. It's done 20 years. But standard 2, for example, has 15 indicators, and most can't tell you what any of those are. This has 4 constructs and about 4 indicators. So it's much more streamlined, but doesn't sacrifice quality. It just streamlines it to where I think it's an easier document to manage and remember some of the pieces that are going to go into that evaluation. So we did hear some positives about that.
One of the things I'm noticing on the language update is like the removal of like the levels of like what defines new educator, career educator, struggling educator. And we've mentioned a few times about the handbook. Is there a way to incorporate in the new policy, like, I know it's a mess when we talk about online housing of documents, but just where somebody could find the handbook? Because if we're being evaluated on it, I want to be able to read all 40 pages myself, like sort of thing. Okay, yeah.
Part of the next steps, if we go that direction, would be working with the IRC and Frontline and cleaning up our current My File library to purge and read out some of the documents that have been in there.
Dust some of them off, yeah.
We would audit every piece to ensure that we're not getting back. That's something that we did for the pilots. We didn't put it in there because we didn't want to confuse the whole district. So we created a team just for the pilot buildings. And that had the keep at a glance. It had the handbook. It had all the rubrics. To your point, yes, while it is 40 some pages, it's very information and it's very easy to navigate. So that is something we would like to make available to all educators.
I think where I have like the notation appendix C, we could add there the link to the full handbook. That's great. That was part of my, when I was going through the language, was trying to decide where's the line of what all we, you know, you can almost look at the whole handbook right here. Right.
Yeah, and just to clarify, Julia, the handbook won't have all the rubrics.
Sure, yeah.
But all the rubrics I'm assuming would be on Frontline.
Yep, they're already loaded.
Questions? We want to roll into some counters and then at some point do a caucus or?
Yeah.
And I struggled with the term on the, end of the day, counters to counters.
We will be on the counter to the counter to the counter.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, I titled it the district response. So this is the Fed paperwork, counter that you guys brought back last time. And also, after redlining that many times, the colors get interesting too.
It's
rough. Yeah. So, but what you guys countered with last time, I believe, was the yellow highlighted parts, right? Okay. So on that first yellow highlighted part, really we kept the spirit of it exactly the same. We just simplified a little bit, and the green is what we added there. and then red line or lined out the rest, but unless no other alternative exists, cancellation, student substitute availability will be avoided. Period. And then we accepted all the changes you had on the second yellow highlighted portion there on the second bullet.
So what's not out, crossed out is what. will be.
Right.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Got
The first cross out was us and then ONEA and then back us again. So
Got
yes,
it.
yes, what's not crossed out in yellow is what's good with. And then I think that was it. That was all the yellow highlighting that we had. Oh, and then the semicolon down at the bottom.
Don't forget that.
Yes,
That's very important to this
that's right.
meeting.
And we accept this.
Just, okay, so I see you added unless no other alternative exists, and then just to clarify, then you wanted to cross out unless no other operational alternatives.
And we just moved that to.
And I'm reading those with a similar intent.
Yes.
That we're not gonna be willy-nilly
No.
just canceling the subs after somebody spent time
Well, I
on
want
something.
to just point out a couple things that I worry about. Number one is, we all know Mondays and Fridays are really heavy substitute usage days. And so we had some initial conversation, do we need to write that we're not going to be willing to look at Mondays and Fridays? And we felt like, no, there's some Mondays and Fridays that are actually pretty good days to be able to utilize. So I just would want to get that out there that, you know, there will probably be some of those days where a principal will say, ooh, that's a Friday that, you know, Shelley's already told us we're going to be short on, kind of thing. And the other one kind of going along with that is just really making sure that these conversations occur well in advance so that, you know, the sooner we can be aware of an absence and get a request for a sub, the greater the odds that that position can be covered. So just kind of keeping that in mind as well.
And just to follow up on that, along the same lines, like our learning services always tries not to do large PDs on Mondays and Fridays for that same reason. And then two, we just wanted to now acknowledge, as Nick did last time, it is a financial commitment, obviously, and just running some rough numbers, you know, it could be anywhere up to $250,000 cost to that if everybody takes 4 days and everybody that falls into that policy. That was a real rough number, but just acknowledging like Nick did, that it's a financial commitment.
Would that include positions who don't typically get subs? Like that number?
Yeah, I took into
Good,
account
yeah.
that.
And one of the questions that popped up, we had a couple sped educators that said, well, do I have to take these days? So these would be, you are gonna talk to your principal on those mutually agreeable dates, and if the sped paperwork days are not helpful to you,
Right.
then no, nobody's gonna come and be like, you have to take these days off to do your paperwork. But it is definitely something that would, help balance the workload. I don't wanna say reduce the workload, but it would help balance the workload.
Maybe a situation where most of my, you know, I'm a sped person, like most of my evals are, you know, usually it's, you're having in March and April because that's when you are placing students. Then those would probably be the better times for me to have the time available to be able to work on paperwork. So, but yet again, just making sure there's that good conversation ahead of time so that we can be sure positions are covered too.
You might be close to draft consensus on this. We ding ding.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Let's
Draft
do that.
consensus.
Ring the bell.
Yeah.
So,
Ding ding.
That was your counterback with
Okay.
removing 9 of those.
nine,
Yeah.
1 day instead of 2.
Yep.
on the raise. That's what David talked about.
So I think that got us down to close to 50%.
I think we're there.
Close to 50% of what had been. We're rolling to response question counters to proposals, so just one counter.
Oh. So I think that's one that we'd be happy to have further conversation. Obviously, we would need to do some digging to figure out exactly how many individuals we're talking about, but knowing that ties to compensation, we felt like that would be something we want to, pause on until we were in those conversations. But Justin and I and Eric Hansen have already started talking in terms of how we might be able to do some data mining. I'm worried the data mining is going to be just opening files and reading transcripts, but anyway, yeah. So if that's was our thought on that, was to pause on that one until we were in the compensation conversation.
That is for the advanced degrees for those like masters that are more than the typical 30 to
Right.
36.
Yes.
Then on the PLC proposal, that was one that we looked at, and we're certainly open to some changes with that policy. As we talked through it, and even with Rick and Tricia, we didn't have real good clarity on a lot of the language and some of the, we just had a lot of questions. And we weren't even sure what questions we had on some of them. I think trying to figure out what the problem is that the language is trying to solve exactly. Maybe the why specifically on some of those things. And what we talked about, what is the structure that the language provides, or what is it trying to provide? And then what is happening maybe currently that the language is trying to prevent from happening, or what is not happening currently that the language is trying to encourage to happen. So as we talked, we had a hard time coming up with even a counter because there was just a lot of confusion on exactly what was intended there. So if we could even get some like specific examples of things that had happened that would explain kind of the language, what it's trying to address. Just because we're not in those every day. So I asked a lot of questions and you guys did a nice job trying to explain it to me, but I think even when I tried to explain it to the rest of them, we had more questions even. Like we didn't understand what maybe was precipitating the need for that language.
And I think because each level has such kind of a different scheduling of PLCs, I think that creates.
We did a lot of, when they're talking about the middle school, like this situation, and talking about grade school, the situation, to be able to understand, you could ask follow-up questions. So we're certainly open to having some more conversation on that. And I don't know if that's something we know, obviously, we come back in the fall and have, so we're running out of time right now. And it was introduced last time, so we didn't have a lot of time to come back. Obviously, if we had to get one meeting, we might be able to hammer something out on that. But just more that why, what we're trying to, the problem we're trying to address, the problem we're trying to fix. Does that make sense? We're certainly not opposed to a change.
I think at least part of it is a feeling that in some of our educators' experience that PLCs seem to be blending into things that would feel more like meetings and less like a PLC, where it's more either administrator driven or something that's more of a like just informational piece rather than a true like collaborative component. So I think part of this, you all can jump in if I'm misstating something, but is trying to help clarify and really get back to what we think the PLCs are for.
I think doing some more concise like that would, does that make sense? Because there's a lot in there. And when I read it, I have trouble getting to that conclusion. Does that make sense? So I think people reading that might probably have people a lot smarter than me. Maybe they would be able to read that and understand, come to that conclusion.
To me, the most important sentence in what we've got proposed from last week is this: the last piece of what's added in the large red chunk, that educators should collaboratively develop PLC agendas with input from administrators, coordinators, facilitators, and or coaches. That really it's centering the educators that are part of that team as the people who should be kind of be taking leadership in that process.
Because right now we have coaches or administrators who are creating the agendas.
Sometimes, yes.
Sometimes, yes.
And I think, I don't know that it's always like intended to happen that way, but just when we have new curriculum or new programs or something new to implement, it can kind of be like, well, this will affect student learning, so let's talk about this during a PLC time. Or like I know in other, like we've in the high school, middle school world, we benefit from having bells, right? So like focus our time on that, but like in other areas, it kind of sounds like from the feedback that we're getting is it's very much like, well, yeah, we know we need to talk about the data, but let's talk about like how to use the program that implements the data. Well, that's not a PLC topic, right? Like that, we're supposed to be looking at the student data, not learning how to use a new program during that time, sort of thing. But a lot of those conversations are not educator driven. It's you need to discuss this. This is the time you have to do it. You've got these 30 minutes. Or even further, like administrators coming in and being like, I'm here, so this conversation's happening now. Versus like, well, we all had our stuff ready to talk about the last unit test we just gave, but that has to be pushed to the side now. So like those are things that are happening during times that are supposed to be PLCs. So like a lot of the language that we added is just trying to focus that back to the spirit of like student data driven conversations, educator driven conversations versus here's like a list of things that need to be discussed. And
think,
sometimes
yeah.
exactly like
I think some of the
Predetermined.
conversations that we've had about appraisal, appraisal being done to the educators versus them being part of the process and driving the process. I think some of these conversations overlap really well with PLCs, is that educators not just being part of a PLC, but being kind of that, the educator expertise is driving that PLC. I think those are some kind of concurrent conversations. And the goal of the language was to center that.
That's very helpful. And then the other question I had up above where it said, the process of successfully developing and implementing PLCs requires commitment to resources such as time and training. Does that indicate a requirement to training of PLCs, or we weren't great questions about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that as we look at truly doing PLCs, I think we will have to continue to have conversations at some point about time and training. It is being in a PLC is in itself a skill that isn't just innate in every single person. And then also being able to accomplish what is the goal of PLC in 30 minutes a week. That's a tough 35 minutes a week. Those are tough things. I don't know if we're in a place right now with our system that we have answers for those. But as we continue to sharpen our focus and our commitment to PLCs, I think those are some future conversations along with many, many other time and training and resource conversations.
Again, that discussion was great. On some of these other things too. Thank you for that clarification. That was very helpful. Transfer.
Yeah. Good problem. And back to the funky color. So, and then I think I confused things because I decided to use my own color coding. So, as you look through this, the yellow is going to be language that had been proposed, that you all had proposed, that we we would be willing to include. And so I'll just kind of go in order here. And so the first one was under definitions, and there was the recommendation to add the definition for district seniority. We thought that was great, so agree with that addition. And then if you flip over to the next page, the recommended language there was, this was in relation to when an employee is putting in for a transfer, and there was a question about whether our system now automatically sends a notice to the building administrator. So Justin and I had some conversation, and that does not happen. So we wouldn't need to change this language. We could keep it as is. So if I'm an educator in a building and decide to put in a transfer to another building, and once my principal, who's not going to get that notice, be notified of that. Then as you move on to the next page, the language up above is what had been recommended, and this is in relation to administrator initiated transfers. And this is in those situations where we maybe have a building that is reducing a section, or a department needs to be reduced by an educator. And so the recommended language up above, there were some things that we had pause with, and so we were recommending keeping the current language, and that's what's in the dark green down below. And I'll just share some of the things that we pointed to that caused us pause. Number one, I'll just share that this language in this particular part of our policy gets used quite often. We often have buildings that are reducing a section, or a department that is reducing a section. And so we rely heavily on this language. And so there were some changes made that referenced, demonstratable factors. There was a comment that rationale shall not be arbitrary or based on subjective preference. And then there was also a reference to the rationale must be on demonstrable factors related to the position, including licensure, specific position-specific qualifications or training, documented performance evaluations, highly qualified requirements, and then relevant extracurricular academic support assignments. I wasn't sure exactly when we talk about relevant extracurricular or academic support assignments, what that might mean. So we would recommend keeping the current language that's in place, that's in that dark green down below. And then the next area is under administrator initiated transfer for other reasons. And so this was the language that had been brought forward that you can see down below that we have marked through. And then we took a stab at trying to create really what we're doing now, because I can completely hear the concern completely, but wanted to try and write the language that reflects what we're doing, but at the same time can be applied across the situations that we know we're going to be encountering and are currently encountering. So we kept the language that when schools are closing or combining, the process of administrator initiated transfer for other reasons will occur. And then what we added was that human resources will provide educators within the closing/consolidated buildings with a preference form. These preferences will be utilized to aid the HR team in placing educators with every effort made to match the educator's preference while maintaining the employment of the maximum number of educators and avoiding a reduction in force. So I think we had a little bit of conversation in our last meeting about the proposed language and just the difficulty in being able to apply that in the myriad of situations that we could come across. So really focusing in on those buildings that are closing or consolidating and making sure that we're taking care of that staff is our number one priority. The change in Westview that's coming next year, that was exactly what we applied in that situation as well. And when we look at educators' preference, we look at everything from, staying in this exact same building. I want to stay in this exact same grade. We also find that oftentimes there are educators that are like, I've been ready for a change. I've been teaching first grade for 15 years and I'd really like to go to kindergarten. I'd really like to go to fifth grade or whatever the case may be. So we provide them that opportunity to give kind of content grade level. We also ask questions about feeder pattern, you know, and hey, my family just moved and actually it would really be nice if there was something a little closer to home. And so I prefer to be in this kind of feeder pattern geographical area. We also ask about any other kind of special characteristics or considerations that they would like to have taken. For example, you know, I really would love to be in a building that's an ELL site or that kind of thing. So those are all the factors we kind of take into account. And then really, you know, Mr. Howe and Dr. Donovan work individually with those educators to make sure. And that isn't just the case in the situations that we're in now. That is in the case of all of these other situations above here too. So when we're looking at having to make changes within the staffing in the building because of just enrollment changes that happen every year. So that was our recommendation for that language. And then on the back side, there was a recommendation, and for some reason it took out what you had recommended. So I don't know how I did that, but so this was on the procedures for callback, and there was a suggestion for letter C to replace that teaching experience in the available position within the last 5 years to look at seniority. And so I could not figure out why I was not wrapping my head around this. And so here's where, so the seniority piece would really not fit here because that's already happened. So when we're to this point, and you can read in the language above that the callback order is based on seniority. So we start with that person who's next on the list that has the most seniority and then go through these things from there. And we are recommending keeping this language in. We feel like this is an important piece when we're talking about staffing our buildings and making sure that we have educators who have that experience in that content area that can serve our kids. So our recommendation was to keep that language as it current stands.
I have a question that's language adjacent. For D, the administrator initiated transfer for other reasons. I know in our current language, it doesn't have the preference forms, although I know current practice is the preference forms. I know our educators at Westview are the most recent to be affected by this language. I know they did preference forms, and I've gotten a lot of questions about the not interview process. Can you speak to that meeting of the educator that says, you know, I'd really love to actually teach fourth grade, and there's a fourth grade position at this other school, and there's a process where the educator, the administrator would have a chance to meet each other. Could you talk through what's the current practice with that? Because I get a lot of questions about that.
Yeah. So we currently do that. And that is really so that we can make sure that the educator has a chance to meet that administrator. But we also didn't want it to be you have to interview kind of thing. So really just offering that opportunity for that educator to meet with that administrator and just have a chance to introduce and get to know one another a little bit to make sure that that match is there. But we also sometimes have situations where there's multiple educators who have that fourth grade preference and we have one position. And so really then having that opportunity for that principal to say, just tell me about your teaching experience and all of those kinds of things, again, to make sure that we have a match for that educator in terms of the needs of that grade level or team and building. Justin, you use that too, so you probably can speak to.
Yeah, all of that is accurate. Not interview conversations, a better word, meet. There's 3 situations we run into when we have one educator in a licensed area and one open. That still applies because we don't want that to just say, well, this is where you are next year and that's cold and callous and it doesn't feel good. So we want there to be a conversation between the two, an icebreaker, tour the facility, see needs, talk about who can meet in other departments, building leaders, etc. So that's one situation, still applies. The next 2 situations are one candidate, multiple openings, multiple candidates, one opening. And those are important as well for our current language because Dr. Dahmer and I ultimately make the placement. That is not on the administrator of the building to make the decision. It's not on the employee to make the decision. That's on us. So we actually call both and we get feedback from both after they meet. And we talk about how did it go? What did you like? What were your concerns? On the administrative side, we encourage what is your teaching methods and styles? What is your PLC experience? Talk to us a little bit about what you're passionate about. So if things are objective as much as possible when they look at what is the current PLC they have, what is the current school improvement goals they have. Same thing when I go back to the employee, I like to talk to them and talk about, do you think your strengths could fit there? And so when you have multiple openings, if you have 3 science positions and 1 candidate, our goal is to really match strengths so that the employee is not only happy, but the building's going to get better because they're there as well. And so that's where that conversation really takes place. It's not so much stock interview questions as it is styles, fits, and welcome.
Does that help?
Yeah. Any other questions? Simmering.
Yeah. Yeah.
As that's simmering, I think probably our next step would be a caucus.
Town summer.
We can maybe start with 20 minutes and then, yeah, let's kind of shoot for that. And then, and then we can, I'll text you if we need less or more.
Okay. Sounds good.
Yeah. sorry that we're back later than we've been trying to do some problem solving.
Okay.
And we aren't at a solution yet, so we thought maybe coming back and saying, here is the problem we're facing, we would come up with a creative solution. So the problem that we're seeing right now is that, in terms of moving forward on a conversation about an MOU, we feel like we need to have the final edited handbook that our bargaining unit would be viewing as part of the MOU. And we don't have that yet. And I know we're all working hard. We're all working a lot of hours. But the reality is we don't have that right now. And so we're trying to figure out how can we get to where I think we all would like to be, without having that. And that is where we're stuck.
I mean, the overall structure of it is there. It is the small thing. It's changing feature edge, making sure that, I mean, it really is formatting. Some last checks on verbiage for consistency pieces, but I think the structure wise, it's there. All of those pieces are in it. So I don't think it would take us long. And I've already started, I mean, a good chunk through. Angie and I have been working through it pretty good.
And the other piece we talked about related to appraisal is the need to like digest the policy language side of things and possibly have a response on that. So what kind of timeline that would take on our end.
Yeah, I think we're trying to figure out when we're looking at like, could we maybe try to come back early next week to, let's finalize things, bring things together. So it doesn't feel like we're trying to pull things after we agree on an MOU. I mean, we want to try to make sure things are open, as transparent as we can have it. Then we're looking at the calendar next week, and as you all can imagine how that conversation is going. I mean, right. And so I think that's kind of where we were spinning our wheels, trying to figure out how to make all those things happen. And that's what we came back late, because we hadn't yet come in with a solution.
And is it just the appraisal handbook is the big?
I think the handbook is the piece, because I just got that added in the drive today. We have a couple of things that we might want to talk about in the policy. I think there's a sentence that was in the original policy that talked about being a collaborative process that was struck out. And so, just a little bit of, and we talked a lot about how the appraisal key process is the collaborative process. So maybe we want to keep that sentence. So just a couple of details there.
Okay.
I think otherwise, I think we have some draft consensus items. I think the appraisal piece is the part that we're stuck on.
So am I hearing that together?
I'm trying to figure out a way to not have that happen, but I can't think of a way that would also be appropriate. That makes sense.
That's the question that becomes if we're finalizing something on, say, next Tuesday or Wednesday. And then you get an MOU, like what's the timeline that lines up before your bargaining unit's off? I cannot do Monday. That is our debate for this board's night.
You get too much better in the week.
Yeah. You have the facility alignment on Tuesday.
You did it last week.
What does Tuesday look like?
Wednesday. I'm just worried that that's
It's a very tight
too
timeline.
Yeah.
late.
Monday and
because-
Tuesday's pushing it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is there a world in which this is two MOUs and the second one happens as early in August as we can conceivably work? I mean, I don't know. I'm just trying to think out
I
loud.
don't think we can have frontline all ready to go.
Oh, that's true.
You know what I mean? Like, we need the summer to get
That makes
everybody
sense.
over. And wouldn't want to do that, you know.
Sure.
Eric, what time's your awards night on?
It's like at 5 to 7.
Oh,
Like it's-
okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's earlier than.
I'm in Minnesota from Thursday to Sunday with kids, so
Oh.
I need that time in between the
Yeah,
school
yeah,
day
yeah.
and the award night to. Yeah.
You know, Eric could make Monday work, anybody else not make Monday work.
Yeah.
And then
We can
Michelle
do
can't
it.
make Tuesday. Anybody else can't make Tuesday work.
I have a final DLT after school on Tuesday, which I don't have to be there.
Just if you need Tuesday with
Look what just happened, Justin.
Smooth, wasn't it?
I could join virtually. As well.
Tuesday?
And if she's done.
Okay. Would we? Could do our normal time?
Yeah, I mean, the facility alignment starts at 6, but if, unless.
Yeah.
That would be.
We'll have to find out if this room is available or if it's somewhere else.
I don't think this one should be.
Yeah.
Because the facility alignment's actually at Santa Fe this time. so.
Yeah, I think we could probably, if we could get the documents beforehand. Because I think, you know, those of us on the committee have been able to see it.
Right.
We just have a lot of people that haven't been on the committee, and so being able to see that more, I think we could probably potentially come with a proposal for an MOU on that day, that then we could discuss, rather than
So
starting
that's
from
kind
scratch.
of
I mean, I think really it's just like that, that's where we're stuck. It's,
The appraisal piece of.
Yeah. Yes, and then we have a little bit of talked about the policy language. And I
But
think,
associated with.
Yeah, yeah, I think
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get you that.
okay,
It may not be fully up.
yeah,
There'll probably be some. Might be a period or something.
right, yes.
But yeah, I think we
But just so I know I've got it correct, draft consensus, we've got the calendars, right? Elementary plan time, sped paperwork, blackout days, and the Mill Creek Theater Academy conference language. You have the same thing?
Yes.
Elementary plan time. you
Yeah,
said?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, those are the draft consensus,
Okay.
yes.
So the only thing like that. You want to say?
I don't think we're there
No.
on assignment or transfer or
So-
PLCs or advanced degrees.
Okay, so we're not looking at those on that one.
We are not looking at
Okay.
those at the MOU right
And I'll just, like, there's a lot of concern. That is a very big stress for most people.
now. Oh, the assignment.
Of the
transfer.
assignment and transfer, like, I mean, looking ahead to board docs, like, this is a big conversation within the community, and it's people's livelihoods that are being affected by this, and so.
Well, let me be clear, you're preaching to the choir. Like,
Sure, yeah.
Every conversation, so.
Yeah.
You know, I think on our side, like, we clearly see our goal is to not have to have conversations where people don't have questions. And that's where our position comes from with our language is putting that in the best possible position to make that happen. So I think we have a shared agreement on that.
Yeah.
The only other thing, just so that it's not completely blindsiding next time, is that we've discussed maybe pulling one of the ECAS items, specifically the middle school cheer and dance, and looking at that, because that may be, that may be a situation where, like, if you don't have that in place at the beginning of the year, you'll have programs die,
That's true. So making that a part of it.
potentially.
Check and make sure this room's available. Just let you know, and then we can have that count.
Hey. There will be no more proposals for county.
Right, that's
Yeah.
Right.
Right, we're not opening up any more cans of worms.
Just working out some stuff on.
Right. We were, yeah,
Oh, yeah, awesome.
Yep.